With this, let's just have some fun. What is Boyertown known for?
Bears.
Bears. Okay, like real bears, or like we have a lot of bears in the woods, or the Boyertown Bears? What are you talking about? The school, or what are you talking about?
Statues.
Statues.
There you go.
Okay. Does anybody know why there's statues of bears? Everybody seen the statues of bears around Boyertown?
Barely.
Okay, barely. Funny story, okay? The day that I shared with the youth group that, hey, God was calling me to plant a church, it wasn't a fun morning. It was kind of like awkwardly silent, for lack of a better term. And you could tell there was a lot of processing going on. And one of the teenagers raised his hand, and he said, like, first thing, like, I'm like, okay, guys, floor is yours. Let's process this together. What are you thinking? And he raises his hand, and in the most dead serious, he goes, I think your church should get a bear. And he said, I think it would be really cool if your church got a bear, and I want to be a part of like the planting of the bear. And dead serious. So it was like, all right, let's go with it. So we kind of went with the bear thing, and it broke the awkwardness, which was good. But what's the story behind the bears? Anybody know? Yep, it's the mascot. Okay, so then there's bears all around town. Why? What do they call, Jared, when you're raising money for your basketball team, what do they call that?
Fundraising.
Okay, fundraising. Booster club or whatever?
Yeah.
It's the most genius booster club invention ever because the school had businesses pay. So it's $3,500 to have the official bear man make a bear in town, okay? And so businesses have the opportunity to make the bear, and the money, part of the money goes to, first of all, representing the mascot, but then also money goes to like uniforms and athletics. So you need to come up with something, like start something new for Upper Prairie Valley. But it was a booster club thing. It's good. Anything else? What else is Boyertown Bears known for, or Boyertown in general, not the Bears? Baseball. That's a very good one. So what has put Boyertown School District from years past is their baseball program. Very winning. Baseball is very big in Boyertown. It's huge. There's baseball fields, and like for a long time, over the last 30 years, like if you had a son, you basically like raised him to play baseball, or he was a failure. Okay, in baseball. Now it's not anymore, but like Boyertown baseball was like huge. They had the stadium. Rick Andre was sharing at the other informational meeting we had that back when he was young, like they had the stadium, so the traveling baseball teams would play there. So Boyertown was known for their having that big stadium there. So. Anything else that Boyertown is known for?
Zerns.
What?
Zerns.
Zerns.
Was.
Let's have a moment of silence. How many of you grew up going to Zerns? Okay, yeah, that's me. I used to get haircuts in there. The average age of the barbers were like 97 and a half. But it was like, that Zerns was a big part of that, and it's no longer there. It's just, there will be a developer that comes in there and does something with that. There's already some bids. So. One other thing that's kind of big now in Boyertown.
Well, three things. Talarico's has a great hoagie shop, probably the best around. They have a museum for trucks in the Historical Museum.
Yes.
And WBYM.
Oh, there we go. That was a good, man. It's like, okay, Jeff.
I always, as a kid, thought as Boyertown is the gateway to the end of the Pennsylvania Dutch, where it starts.
Yeah.
You know, as far as where you run into people that would still speak Pennsylvania Dutch.
It's a very, very true. And there's still a lot of, we lived in Bally, and up on the hill, Church Street, heading up into the mountains, okay? We met a couple. Kristen used to run up that hill, it's been one of the issues in our marriage. It was dangerous. I'm like, why did you run? But she loved that run, okay? And there was an old couple there. One time a truck stopped and was like, kind of like following Kristen. And so there's a couple in their 90s, Helen and Leroy, old Pennsylvania Dutch couple. They were butchers. And they would sit on their front porch while Leroy went and got his gun and said he was getting ready to say if anything happened, he was going to protect Kristen. So, like, don't trespass up in the mountains up there. Those Pennsylvania Dutch are legit, real people up there, okay? Anything else? One more thing that's major now, like it's kind of the central figure now. The train, Colebrookdale Railroad. Anybody rode the train yet? Okay, awesome. In the past year, okay, Pennsylvania has recognized that. Last year it was the third most visited something in Pennsylvania. Okay, and so they got like $1 million grant to just restore that whole area. They're going to put a train station in and do a bunch of different things down there to really build up that area because the train has become such a central part. Like you go down into Souderton where Kristen works, and people talk about, yeah, I was up at the train this weekend, and it's like become a big thing, even for farther out than that. So that was just wanted to get the juices flowing with like what Boyertown is. And so the purpose of this meeting, we're just going to spend some time kind of revisiting the why we're doing a church plant. What I have done is I sent an email out probably a month ago to a lot of different people, all ages, people that I knew were going to be staying at UPCC, people that were praying about being committed to the church plant. And I said, hey, what are questions that you have? And I would love to have those so that when I do these informational meetings, I'm actually answering questions that people have and not just blabbing up here. You've already had to hear me enough this morning. So that is what I have done is I've just taken a lot of the questions that we've put together. And let me just go up here. Okay, go to here. I think that says January. Boom, and we'll go right here. So I just want to run through these slides to kind of give us a glimpse of what's happening. So first of all, why a church plant? Now some of you are more aware than others. There's really three primary reasons that the elders of UPCC have said, hey, this is what God is leading us to. Number one, it's just biblically modeled. Luke 14:23 talks about going out into the highways and byways and calling people in for worship. And that's one of the roles of the church is, hey, we want to be planning other churches. And we came to the point, which leads into some of these other ones, where we said, if we're going to do that, it doesn't make sense for every church to plant a church, but there has to be multiple factors happening. And two of those factors that entered into us going and doing this, it was our ministry philosophy. We sat down as leaders of the church and said, hey, what are we passionate about? And it's relational ministry, okay? A lot of people come here and they're like, man, we really appreciate the relational focus of this church, and that's why we're here. A lot of us came because of that. And so to best do that, you have to say a certain size. Now, are there big churches that do relational ministry? Well, it's very few and far between because it's challenging. The bigger you get, the harder it is to do relational, life-on-life discipleship church model. It's just as challenging. So we're like, hey, if we want to really be about that, we really need to pray about what does that look like? Do we go to multiple services? Now, this morning was a bad indicator because of the storm. But if you've noticed, like we are way past the 80% number in that sanctuary on a Sunday morning. A number that's really good for churches is you don't want to be over 80% capacity because people walk into your church and then they go, and they walk out because it's just too many people. They feel overwhelmed. It looks established. I'm not needed here. They could be missed. There's multiple factors to that. So we just really, ministry philosophy was a huge one. Then there's some practical things that said, okay, if that's our ministry philosophy, then there needs to be some practical things in place. And one of those was just the growth, again, like I said, but then just God's leading. All right, where are people from our church coming from? General direction, where are they at? Because that would make sense to start praying to that. And then it just came to, hey, is there someone that feels called to go lead that? And that's been the dilemma over the years. Is like, hey, we would love to do this. We would have loved to do it 5 years ago, but God had to provide someone that felt called to do that. Enter God stirring in me and Kristen's heart over the last couple years of just loving our neighbors and feeling called to that area. That's when that began and started, and there was a calling there. But then God began to call a few other people that were in that area to say, yeah, like we could see ourselves. If you ever do that, we want to go with you. And then God used the affirmation of my church, which is how God raises up leaders, is in the church community, to say, hey, Brian, I think God's calling you to this, and we want to support you in that. So those are just 3 reasons of why a church plant and why we're moving forward. Hey, this is a nice, I'm going to do questions at the end. So if you have any questions throughout this, think about it, write it down. It's a nice, intimate group. Feel free to ask any questions as we're going through this. So why Boyertown? I already hit on that. God's calling on Brian and others. There's a location of many current UPCC members. And there's gospel opportunity there with future growth. So as you project out and look at what growth is happening in our area, I mean, we feel it right here with, you know how those THP homes, they started and then they just keep going. And then every time you drive by there, you're like, when are they going to stop? Well, it's forecasted that in the next 10 years, there's going to be no, like, anything between us and Quakertown. It's just going to be one big, like, either housing or, they're putting the hospital in. There's all of that. Well, if you put that, look over at Boyertown, there's continue to be communities that are put in. There's forecasted growth. There's shopping centers coming in very strategic spots where wherever Walmart shows up, people are soon to follow. That's the key to everything. Like, think about how long it's been since East Greenville put their Walmart in. We're like, what are they doing? Like, there's no people here. Where is everyone? But then all of a sudden you see like housing developments going up everywhere. They know, okay? And they have money, so that helps too. Okay, and then the replication of our church DNA was another thing. If that was really at the core of our heart. I'm passionate about this church. I love the way we do ministry. And so my heart has been, man, like, I want to go replicate that DNA somewhere else. Because I think it's missing in a lot of places. There's a lot of great gospel preaching churches. Well, there's not a lot. There's a group of gospel preaching churches in Boyertown that I will be partnering with, being a part of Bible studies with them and all of that. But a lot of them are where they're located, there's a need for a gospel preaching evangelical church at the heart of Boyertown. So I just want to go replicate the DNA of what God's doing here. So one of the questions has been, like, what type of church plant is this going to be? There's different models and types of church plants. One is a parachute, where you literally, well, you don't literally parachute. You drop into an area, you move there with like another family. So it'd be like, hey, Bob, Hannah, me and Kristen are moving to Kentucky this month. Do you want to go plant a church with us? That's parachuting, okay? Kristen was a part of that in college. Two families from Faith moved down to Florida, and during her college year, she helped with that church plant. It started 2 families in a home. Then it grew to a couple families in a home. Like, she ran the children's ministry as a freshman in college and was part of the worship team because, like, if she didn't show up, there was nobody there, okay? So it was like, that's parachuting. That's one model of church plant. The second is a multi-site. So you have an example of this would be Calvary Souderton that planted in Quakertown. They're simulcasting in their pastor from their home base, but they're kind of a replication, but they're kind of more of a multi-site church. Another one is like a network or denominational, where denominations create new churches through their pipeline, or you have like a Keystone that would be like a network. My sister and brother-in-law attended Keystone until they moved a week ago, but they're kind of like that. Montgomeryville was the main hub, and then they had shared leadership, but they had pastors that were at each plant. What's our type of church plant? It's basically a mother church plants on autonomous church. That's what we are. Our desire is for UPCC to be the mother church, and for lack of a better term, is to give birth to another church that is going to be dependent, and that's how it'll work. So the question then is, all right, well, what is autonomous? Like, what does that really mean? Like, how does that actually manifest itself? An autonomous church. UPCC will oversee the planting of a church that will be self-directed as its own local church of believers. However, UPCC will provide oversight and support as the church matures. The goal is for the new church to move from full dependence to independence as soon as possible. However, there is no timeline on that. So again, if you have questions about that, basically what that means, and I'll unpack it a little bit, is this is kind of how we picture this as leaders, it going like a timeline. We're going to be very dependent in the beginning. Full dependence. My salary will be paid by UPCC. Praise the Lord, by all of us as we all plant a church. As God blesses, Lord willing, we begin to grow up. Okay, we have people that now give. Our finance team is already tracking committed families that are here so that we can begin to forecast budgets for both here and there. And so hopefully in all areas we become more and more, and we begin to grow up. And we're partially dependent. And then in God's timing, we become full adults, and you know that full adults are never fully dependent of their parents, okay? And now in this culture, it's even delayed a little bit longer. But we have no timeline on this. But this is kind of an example. So what are the areas of dependence? There's 3 primary areas that we talk about when we talk about full, partial, and then growing up as an adult. Number 1 is leadership. I need leadership. The church's leadership. In the first year to a year and a half, my plan is not to have any elders at the new church plant. I've gotten that advice from many other church planners that your leaders will rise to the top and you'll be able to cultivate, and people will step up as time goes on. And the church needs to have ownership on appointing. The people that are actually going there need to appoint the elders. Like, if I just appointed elders in the beginning, or UPCC said, these are your 3 elders, like, what ownership is given to the people that are actually going? So I will be answering to the elder board of UPC. I am an elder here. And as I make decisions or decisions come up, it'll all be approved by them and through them. And I'm thankful for that. And just as a side note here, one of the coolest things to this whole thing has been to see just the support from the elder board as a whole to affirm sending me out. That is rare in a lot of churches. But then also Pastor John, God growing him to the point where we know what makes him such a great pastor. He's highly relational and he cares deeply for people. Well, you take a highly relational pastor and he has to get to the point where he's willing to let go of people that he cares for deeply. That's a process, okay? He shared at the first informational meeting. He came and just shared his heart on how God has like kind of worked him through that process. And now I will say it's a beautiful thing that we're walking arm in arm, and it's like a mentorship relationship, but it's really grown into a friendship where he's like excited about what God is doing as we plant this church. So that's been a fun thing. He's getting more and more sentimental the closer it gets. So that's the one part I liked about kicking it back to September, because in our meetings, when we first announced it, he started his meetings like getting a little emotional, like, I'm really going to miss you. And now the further it goes, I like keep hearing it, so it's good, you know? So I tell him, like, yeah, you just keep laying it on. You're going to miss me, you know? So leadership. But that's been a beautiful thing to see John's heart and the excitement that he has as a pastor. That is rare and exciting, and I appreciate it. Finances, again, areas of dependence, is where we're at. And then people. In the beginning, like a lot of you, it's been a big blessing, is like, hey, I don't really feel God calling me, but I do want to be a support, and maybe I'm going to come out once a month and just be a support in that role. We don't know what this looks like. We're going to need people in the beginning in different areas, and we're going to, as we get closer, we'll kind of know what that looks like. But in the beginning, we're going to be dependent on UPC for people, kind of like we go to Camden and Allentown, take teams down there to serve. That'll be something that maybe God lays and stirs in your heart to be a part of as we move that direction. So those are our dependence areas. So I just want to give an update. A lot of you have had this, okay, that we handed out a while ago. That's just kind of the mile markers. I just want to kind of give an update running down through some of those as we go through it. Before I get into the plans of our church, this is just a reminder that I keep before myself. It's easy to get caught up in the plans of this and get excited about that and forget like the whole mission of why we're doing what we're doing in planning a church. The purpose is just to reach the lost to Jesus Christ and to build a biblical community who seeks to live passionately for Jesus Christ. So just a mantra that I've kept in my head for my own, like, keeping me focused is that, like, God's purposes are bigger than my plans. And so we give these to the Lord, and I share these as saying, hey, God, here's our plans, but we know that you direct the steps, and you're, like, going to do your thing, and this is what it's all about. So just want to start with that before we jump in to the plans that we have. So this is idea launch date September 8th, 2019. If everything goes as planned, this is what we're marching forward to. So that's 231 days from now. It's kind of scary. But it's coming, it's here. It seems kind of far off in some ways, but in other ways it's not. And so like what needs to happen between now and 231 days from now where we launch a church in Boyertown. And so just want to kind of give a quick update on a few things. Staff at UPCC, our passion is to fully replace me. That God would lead us to a person that takes my spot in the roles that I do. I'm a unique bird in the sense that I came in as a youth guy and have kind of grown in all areas. So there's a mix. There's a lot of great youth guys out there, and there's a lot of great administrative guys out there that are kind of have grown into ministry, can preach, and do those things. Finding the balance of that can be a challenge. So we've had some great interviews with candidates. One we were leaning towards that we felt God was leading to, thought it would be a great fit, and just in this past week, God shut the door on that and said it's not a great fit for them. And so it needs to be a mutual like fitting together of this person where we're like, yeah, that's a fit, or it's a great fit for their family. So that's a big thing to pray about. That's a big thing that we want to have like checklisted off. Is all right. And the goal would be either May 1st or June 1st to bring that person in and spend a couple months overlapping with me and being in staff meetings with me and John and all of those things. So that's an update. And again, a lot of these are just prayer things that you can be praying about. So location. The question of location. I want to that's why I had the map up actually, let's go over here and go map. So this is Boyertown. If you're looking at it, Canada is north and Florida is south, okay? So we're looking at that way. We are over here. Everybody say hi, okay? We're over here. If you look, this is downtown. And for those of you that have just driven through it, you're trying to grasp, here's where 173 meet. So that's where, for those of you that are addicted to Dunkin' Donuts, it's right here, so you know where your stop is on the way to Pottstown, okay? There it is. So 2 main roads that surround Boyertown. You have 100 that runs side, and then you have 73 that runs, or Main Street, Philadelphia Ave is what it's called here, West Philadelphia, and as the main center through Boyertown. And so you say, okay, God, we know you want us there, but we also want you to put us in the perfect spot that you would have us. And so you do have to practically look at, okay, where are other churches that we feel are preaching the gospel and are being effective in reaching their community? And a lot of those are Gilbertsville side, right here. And so our heart is to be on the northeast side. So if you were just to, let me do this here. Here's the Boyertown YMCA, okay? So you're coming down 100, you would come off the exit here. Here's the Boyertown YMCA. Somewhere along this northeast is where we would love God to place us. It's on this side, so if you were going to go out to 100 and take a left, you would hit that before you go through Boyertown, or the other side, the south side of Boyertown. And so that is where we're praying. There's a couple options along Spring Street here, where there's the multi-services building there that's very active in the community. We're praying, I'm meeting with the director there to talk about options. Like, first of all, hey, we're here. We're going to meet John and Open Link director, because they all kind of work together, and just say, hey, we're here and we want to bless you guys. And can we meet in your building? No, but that's a part of it. Just weighing different options. What's it look like to start? Again, if it's just a few families, we'll start in a living room somewhere. If that's what God has for us. But that's where we're headed, is that side. Now, another option that we looked like, if God just closes that door, another option that we looked at, which would be a great space, is, let me come over here. Here is Boyertown Community Park. Okay? I hearted it. Okay? So right here at the Boyertown Community Park, beautiful park, highly active in the Boyertown community, very active. And the pool, the community pool, is right here alongside of it. So, and then there's an elementary school and a middle school right here across the street. High visibility, very central to a lot that happens. It's not downtown, but it's there. And what they have there is there's this Burke's International building. It's a huge building that's used for trucking. It's an industrial complex. But we began to look at that and say that might be an option where you could rent a part of that building, sign a lease, and make it our own space, and be there. And it's a great spot. Now, the two similarities between these places is me and John one day, we have project days, and we drove up to Boyertown to look for a location. And we're like, let's just drive around, have fun, and dream. So we're driving around, and we take a left on Main Street, and it hits us almost simultaneously like, oh my word, there's a major difference in this town. There's no parking on Main Street. There's no parking. So that changed our whole thing, and we're like, let's go look for parking lots. Okay? And that actually began to be our focus, is we need to find parking. We're blessed with having Main Street parking, but we know the challenges of Main Street parking. I think our church, if we had a parking lot, would be a lot bigger. I really do. I think it's just a practical thing. If some people come here, whether it's age, they have 13 kids, and getting them across the street is dangerous. There's a lot of factors. I'm praying that God lead us to a good parking lot that has a place we can meet next to a parking lot. That's what I'm praying for. So you can't, because we want to be downtown Main Street and replicate this, but we also it's foolish to say, hey, we're going to set up a church and there's nowhere to park your car in this day and age. If everyone still rode the train, it would be perfect, because they could just get off the train and come to church. So these are the two main areas that we're just giving to the Lord, and so that's where you guys come into play. I had a gentleman who was sitting here for the first informational meeting named Jim. He's been coming, him and his wife, and he was here for the first meeting. Long story short, it was the first time I met him. He's been working and living in Boyertown for over 25 years. So he knows every building, and we're getting together for breakfast next week. He was like, I know that Burke's building. I know how it's broken up. He worked as commissioner there and has a lot of so it's just cool. Random person here, God's already working, and we're just going to see what are some options as we look around town. But if you have any options or people that you know that you're like, hey, you should check this out, or there's a church that's meeting here, but it might be a flexible space, that's what you can do. So those are the two locations right now. Again, praying for be on the north side, but open to wherever God has us as we begin. Make sure you're registering your questions. All right? So church name, good question. Thanks for asking. Okay, church name. This is something, I had 3 or 4 names going around my head for like 6 months. And it was very frustrating because I would like present it to a couple people and they'd be like you could just tell it was like crickets, you know? And so I began to like really pray and like you don't want to make too big a deal about a church name because it's not what the church is about. But the church name is kind of important because you kind of feel like you're stuck with it, you know, forever. So I began to pray about it and I asked a couple guys, I reached out to a couple guys that have done this before and they're like, I'm like, what do I do? How do you come up with a church name? They're like, you'll just know. And I'm like, okay, great. Thanks for your help. So you'll just know. Fast forward about a month and a half ago, maybe a little longer than that, I was up in New York City. Mike was with me. We were at an exponential conference right downtown. And the exponential staff took us out to dinner one night. And we're sit down at a table. We're randomly put at a table with a guy. And he's a church planter up in Michigan. They're like an LCBC type. Like he gets $1.5 million a year just to plant churches. That's his only job. I'm like, dude, that is awesome. And so the church is just like, every year we're going to pump out another church. So he goes in and he like, you know, they hire bands and everything. Totally different animal. But it was great talking with him and he had some like good practical advice. But something struck me as we're talking. He goes, hey, or I go, what's the name of your church? And he goes, oh, it's a little different. It's called 242 Community Church. And I go, 242? I said, Acts 242. He's like, yeah. I go, our church uses that vernacular in our what we used to call family worship. So I said 242 is a very common term in our church. And he's like, oh, that's really cool. So fast forward, I kind of like instantly sparked to me. I'm like, I really like that. I like that name. It's a biblical reference. And here's the thing. The guy goes, the coolest part about this name is that the next question everyone asks as you tell them about it is, what is 242? And he goes, it's a natural road into the gospel of this is what the church is about. This is the gospel. And so long story short, I later that night I went to Mike and I'm like, hey Mike, what do you think of that name? He's like, dude, I love it. I think that's it. And I had been feeling that. So then I go home to Kristen and I'm like, you know, I think I have the name. And I like say it to her and without batting an eye, she goes, that's it. She goes, I love it. That's awesome. That's it. That's the name. So that was a really cool thing that God did in just the last 6 weeks. I wrote the guy up in Michigan and I'm like, hey, is this like copyrighted? Can I steal it? And he's like, yeah, no problem. It's not copyrighted. There's not a lot of them out there. He goes, just so you know though, if you do Google advertising, we'll kick your butt because we're like a really big church. So make sure you target your advertising to Pennsylvania. So I looked it up right away and he goes, there's nothing else in New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Delaware, or even farther than that has this name. So that's just a neat, unique, like God's going to allow that to grow and flourish. So what does that mean? So it was cool. I came back and shared with John, and John's like, hey, do you know that like when I developed the core values of UPCC, Acts 2:42 to 47 is where I spent all my time trying to decide and pray about what the core values of UPCC were all about. And they're all in here. And so one of the things I'm going to have the team do that's committed and going is to begin to process like what would be good core values out of this. A lot of them will probably match and replicate UPCC. But just an amazing set of verses here. And they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching, to the fellowship, to the breaking of bread, and to prayers. Again, Peter speaks at Pentecost. Thousands are saved, okay, in a moment. Holy Spirit descends. And the next verses in the early church is this. They instantly developed community. And all came upon every soul, and many wonders and signs were being done through the apostles, and all who believed were together and had all things in common. And they were selling their possessions and belongings and distributing the proceeds to all as any had need. And day by day, attending the temple together and the breaking bread in their homes, so you have corporate worship and worship in the home, they received their food with glad and generous hearts, praising God and having favor with all people. And the Lord added to their number day by day those who were being saved. I mean, if we were to spend time here, it's where our core values as UPCC are, and it excites me to say, hey, this is where our core values are going to come from as we go replicate the DNA of this church. So that's kind of an exciting update that God's kind of just given me a passion for, and others that as I've shared the vision. So what's a mission statement? Well, if you look, and they devoted, in every translation of Scripture, devoted is used. So what would be a mission statement? Devoted to Christ and community. That's going to be the mission statement of 242 Community Church as we move forward. This is what we're going to be about, and we'll unpack that as we move forward. So the next question that's asked is, who's committed? Who's going? Like, who among us is leaving? And so that question, I have some people are just curious. And so I wanted to just share as a beginning process some of the families that have committed already. This is the families that have said, hey, God is calling us, we want to go. So you have East, Durstein, Kramer, Alex and Katie. Obviously, Kristen's going with me, my boys. This is my mother-in-law, Sue Scharf. So thanks for coming. I appreciate it. She didn't have to. Did I force you to come? I did not, okay? But it will be nice for childcare. Amen. Okay? So, thank you, Lord. And then Taylor, Mike, and Julia. So these are the people that God so far has some of these were instantaneous, hey, we've been praying about this. And then I have a whole other list over here of people who have expressed interest, who are just praying through it. And at the end, I'm going to have the Dursteins just share some thoughts. They've been part of a church plant it's probably been about 10 years ago now. God called them to a church plant, and I want them just to share how if you're processing this and thinking through it, how you can be praying about what specifically do you pray about to know that the Lord is kind of stirring you to do that. So that's the names of the people going. So I just want to wrap. What's a timeline? This will affect everyone, whether you're going with the church plant or staying here. We are planting a church together. Okay, that's important to recognize, is that we are planting a church. Every person will be affected by this. Now, the beautiful side of that is we will all be stretched outside of our comfort zone. When you remove families from here, guess what that might mean for your very important nursery ministry that you serve once a week in? You might have to serve twice a week. You might have to do it. Now, I think the beautiful part about that is the ground has been cultivated. A lot of you have witnessed Camden and Allentown and seen the faithfulness of believers there who serve week in and week out. We've been very, very blessed here. God is so good about the way we're able to format things, because we have an abundance of people that faithfully serve. But how does this really look as we move towards September? So informational meetings that we're having now. In February, we're just going to have church plant interest meetings. Forget the title, what they are. All they are is we're going to invite into our home those that are more interested or want to hear more information. Doesn't mean you're committing, just hey, here's what we're processing and thinking through. We want to know more about that. Along the way, we'll be updating the church on Sunday mornings to keep everyone aware. March to June, we're going to start home gatherings where the focus will be prayer, Bible study, planning, and vision casting. That's where we're just going to kind of all get on the same page, for lack of a better term, and say, hey, here's what we're doing, and this is what we're all about. This is where you might start seeing some ripple effects to everyone else in the church. Some that are in gap groups right now might say, hey, I am going to move to this gathering, or we're going to begin a gap group or fellowship or gathering, discipleship as a group and doing those. They'll probably be, not promising, but they'll probably be Sunday evenings. Seems like to be the best time for everyone to gather as we move through March, April, May, and June. July, we'll just start practical preparations. Lord willing, we know where we're going to be at this point, so that helps us begin to plan some of the more nitty-gritty, what do we need? Do we need chairs? Do we not need chairs? How many, are we even going to have a nursery? Do we have a nursery space? All these things that are just the practical nuts and bolts, those will begin to be unpacked earlier in some sense, but July will begin to really hit that hard. And so it's going to look like a little different summer for a lot of us than normal as far as preparing for this. August, we are going to start Sunday morning gatherings wherever our location is. For lack of a better term, dress rehearsal church, where we're going to start just gathering together, worshiping, and that'll give us a kind of a glimpse into, oh, we need to tweak this, or man, we should unlock the door before we start the service so people can actually come in. Little things that you catch along the way and sharing that. So that'll be in August, and then September 8th. The first weekend in September would not be a good weekend to launch a church. Why? Labor Day. Be a very bad idea. So September, that's why it's the second week of September, will be the launch date as we move into that. So just to close, what can I do? Where are we at? Like I said, we are planning a church, and there's just three things. Number one, I'm going to begin just a newsletter that I'm sending out to specifically pray over certain things, and they'll be spontaneous a lot of the times. Hey, this week I'm meeting with so-and-so. Can we raise up an army and pray over this topic? So through the weekly update in the coming weeks, you'll have an opportunity to sign up for that on a Google Doc and just say, hey, I want to be aware. Every church plant that's successful has one common denominator. It's not the amount of money they have. It's not who the pastor is. It's that they were started on their knees through prayer. That's the common denominator in all successful church plants. And so that is so huge that if at anything else, if you can bask this baby in prayer, it's not minuscule. It's just as important as anything else that's happening. So that'll be the prayer partner. Become a financial giver. So the elders have just opened up a line at the start of the new year where you can begin to give towards the church plant. Now, very important caveat. This is not like in replacement of your regular giving that you give to Upper Perk. Like I said, Upper Perk is, it's weird to say that. Okay, we are supporting me fully, okay, my salary, everything else. We are, the elders have already said, hey, like God has blessed us with this house that's for sale. We have 3 showings. It's up in Scranton. Someone donated a house to our church and said, I don't want it, sell it. And so it's on the market. The elders have already approved that 50% of that sale is going to go right into the church plant. I mean, that does not happen. That is an amazing thing that God's doing. So we're going to put that aside and have that as the beginning fund, which is starting off healthy. God has blessed this church financially in so many ways. So to have that and to be able to begin with that. But as you begin, there's a giving line that you can start giving. Really neat. We got our first check last week. Someone donated. Dwight, what was it for? As a treasurer. Remember, someone donated and marked it for new Bibles, I think. Isn't that a neat, like, just cool blessing? Like, God laid on someone's heart. Don't know who it is, but that first $100 is for God's word to be, like, gotten and bought and for the new church. Like, I'm just like, that's a really neat thing. And so whatever God lays on your heart, you can begin to pray about that of becoming a financial giver through this process. And then next is become a church planter. I'm just asking everyone to ask the questions, to say, here am I, Lord, send me, and I'm willing. God is not even going to lead everyone that lives in Boyertown to this church plant. Fully aware of that. But I'm just asking every one of us, if we are planning a church, to say, hey, God, I'm just saying I'm willing, and make it clear that you want me to do it. It usually starts, I don't think there's this voice that comes like in your sleep and says, go to Boyertown, or anything like that. I think there's a stirring that begins in your heart that could have been happening a long time ago, or it just starts right to say, you know what? Like, I think that would be the most challenging thing I ever did, but like, I'm kind of interested. If you are, Krista and I have set aside Monday nights from here until September. Our Monday nights are dedicated solely to meeting with people that are interested in finding out more, processing. You may sit down with me and I talk you out of even coming, okay? Like I'm not like, it's not like a sales pitch. This is like, what is God? I go through four words. I go, what are your hesitations? What are your expectations? What are your passions? And then what are you doing to prepare if we feel like it's a good fit? So those are the 4 words that I hit with everybody that sits down on Monday night. I say, hey, like, what are your hesitations? Because they might be real. Like, that might not make sense for you to do this. And then you got to know expectations. Like, this ain't going to be no walk in the park, okay? Talking through that. What are your passions? Would you fit? Yeah, you absolutely, everybody's going to fit in the beginning. But when it comes to that last one, honestly, like, I love the families that are today, but we need more families. Like, we're praying for 50 people to go. Right now, I think we're at like 33, 34 people. So I love for God to stir in some of your hearts to say, hey, I want to go. I want to be a part of this. And I know for a lot of others of us, it's going to be, hey, I just want to commit to coming once a week and just being a support system, which will be amazing and huge. So I'm going to have just because I want to make sure they have an opportunity just to share their heart, I'm going to have the Dursteins come and just share. And then any questions that you have, I need like at least a couple good questions, okay? So someone come up with a good question, all right? Yeah. Whatever you want to do. Wherever you.
So Brian asked us, to share a little bit about our experiences in the past, and I think to start with, Brian has talked about the fact that church planting has a lot of different models, and a lot of times each church plant kind of has a life of its own. So for us committing to this, there certainly are similarities in some way to our church planting experience. I guess it was in 2007 and 2008, but there's quite a few differences. So I don't want to get into too many of those, but I think our experience with the first one really was cool for us because I think it forced us to really step back from what our church experiences had been growing up and what we kind of looked at, well, this is what church is, or this is what the church is, to like, what is it? What is the church? And why do we do things the way that we do them? Why has it always been this way? And that was one of the coolest parts of the process, to really examine it. And I know as in talking with Brian, as we expressed interest, he challenged me to be reading through Acts. Just read through it. Just keep reading through it as we learn so much about what the church is all about and how it started. So, spending time doing that, our previous plant was really big with learning from that experience. When we left that church, it was because we moved to Boyertown, which is about 15 minutes from here. And one of the biggest things that attracted us to this church, and there were a lot of things, and we love this church. One of the biggest things was the church planting model and that vision. So I remember sitting down with Pastor John in our living room, and he talked about, like, this is what we envision one day. We're not trying to be a massive church. We eventually want to plant, and we don't know what that looks like and where that would be. But there are families in the Boyertown area now, so there's always a chance. And I think for us, being involved directly in our community is a huge reason why we want to do this. It is nothing about, we don't like UPCC, we love it here. But personally, I've never felt a complete connection with this community, because most of what we do is not in this community. We come here because of the church, but especially the age of our kids, of our family, the activities they're involved in, like, much of what we do is in the Boyertown area, and I think that's really the heart of where we're at. And as we prayed through things, like, where is our greatest influence? And that's really what I learned so much from our previous one. Focus on your areas of influence in your life. Like, where does God have you, and where's your greatest opportunity to impact others? So that's certainly something that we've talked to. I don't want to hog up too much of the time. Rebecca has some things she wants to share here as well. So.
No, Jeff basically hit on everything, the foundation. As far as when we were on the other church plant, it was very challenging. I was pregnant, and it was during the time I was pregnant and then had my baby. So when, that's the time when you depend on community a lot. Well, our community was still being established. So it was really hard, and it was taxing because I love how they use the word mother model. I'm like, oh, that makes so much sense. And I love how you said, your intention of being a mom is to encourage your child into independence. Like, that's what our job as parents are, and I was like, that's just awesome. I love that. So we didn't have that with our other church plant. So and also when you raise a child, you're not raising them exactly like you to be exactly like you are, but it's like, here's our foundation, here are our beliefs, here's, and go ahead, be your own self with that, have wings with that, but this is where the foundation is. So that kind of really clicked there, which was cool. And I'm sorry, I'm all over the place here, but Jeff did mention, a big part of our reason is location. I worked in the Boyertown School District, and actually those places where he showed, it is interesting because Boyertown does have a lot of solid, loving, active parents and families. They love their kids. I don't know necessarily how many of them have relationships with Christ, very moral families. Like I said, you see a lot of community and so forth. But there is also a large area of hurting people. There's a low-income housing area. I taught in a school that was in there, and I've seen firsthand, I've taught kids who are going through major stuff. So, when Brian and Christian brought up about this and how it'd be in Boyertown, of course, because we're physically close and our school's there, but I'm also like, just as with this community, it's very similar in that, you have your solid families and you have your families that are struggling. I think I've worked at a church as well, at a preschool, and so I do also know some of the churches that there is some lacking of, from what I see, I don't know all the churches, but like you said, there is some areas where, there are some solid Bible-believing churches, but there are some areas that if, you were to shade it in, it's, I would say, lacking in there, so that's what was exciting as well. So we talked a lot about location and area. I mean, it's different for each of you. Again, we're not up here saying, go with Brian. And that's the other hugest thing. I love how this is our church, and with our old church plants, he always wanted to say, this isn't, let's say his name is Tom, this isn't Tom's church. This is not Brian's church. It's not, are you going with Brian? Are you going here? And the way that UPCC has handled, I think, pretty much everything, every type of change or difficulty, it's always been spirit-led and it's always been unified. I mean, to be a part of a church that's had this unity, and again, as parents, you teach your children things that are going to go with them. I think what has been established here at UPCC is going to travel with this new church, and that's exciting. Yes, there are some challenges, and it isn't going to be all, you're dealing with humans, We had some difficulties with the people on our church plant, and you're going to have differences. You're going to have, you think this way, you think that way, but that's the beauty of it and bringing it together. And again, with the prayer and the Holy Spirit being at the foremost, it is really cool to see how it comes together.
I was just gonna add, and I know Brian's been speaking a lot about prayer, and Becca just referenced that. So, as you're kind of going through the process, talk through for us going through the process. So, if this was just Becca and I, like, it would have been like a super simple, like, bam, we are going immediately. This is easy. This is automatic. But, with any decision, there's pros and cons to everything. So, the first and biggest concern for me is the age of our kids and, where they're at and the importance of a strong community of influence.
It's 12, 10, and 9, by the way, so we have a junior higher.
Yeah.
Yeah, just so they know what the
Yes,
reference is.
and so that's such a massive deal, and I know for us, a couple of our kids have had a really difficult time because they absolutely love what they have here. So that's certainly a fear for us as we go. Like, Brian's putting up the numbers right there, and we're like, all right, so is there going to be like one friend that they have, and what's the level of connection, and what's that going to be? And so at the end of the day, when you're praying through it, it kind of goes back to the message today. Like, all right, what is Jesus calling of us, right? What does God want us to lay at his feet, right? Like, that's our first and number one priority. So just that prayer and the confidence that you get from that, you know what, like, in my mind, I look at this and say, maybe there's going to be no friends for them, but God's going to open some doors, and even the conversation that we had with our kids about this last night, one of them that was resistant to it said, well, maybe my friend, he listed a friend, maybe they'll come to the church then if we're there. Like, because it's in our community, maybe there's a greater chance that they would come. And why would I go over to Pennsburg to this when I could, right here, they're right in their church. So it was kind of another affirmation for us and an encouragement there. So I think related to prayer, that's the biggest thing, that you're just continuing to lay those pros and cons at God's feet and just allow him to give you peace.
And like your gifts and abilities, and it might not be a location choice for you. It might be I'm really strong in childcare, and God's just giving me these abilities, and I want to help them. That type of thing. So there's a whole bunch of reasons. Doesn't just have to be a location type of thing. So.
Awesome, thank you. Appreciate it. Any questions? Cover a lot of information. Any thoughts? Yes.
Once the doors open, will you be following the same schedule as what time church begins, and if children's church is going to follow certain?
Yeah, it's a great question. So some of those like nitty gritty details are really, they're unanswerable at this point. Like I said, like we're taking a framework, more of a ministry philosophy over there. The logistics and how those play out. The biggest thing right now, they're just dependent on space and where we're at. I would see for example, the way we do equipping hour. That's something that the elders here are passionate about. Like we preach, and then we have an opportunity for people to be further equipped. I'm on board with that. How that plays out, what that looks like, I can't tell you at this point. But it's a really good question. I think those are things as we get closer, we'll be able to update through that letter. Say, hey, like we're gonna have our own space, which means time is not a constraint. Like I know if you're let's say we end up meeting at Boyertown High School, and they say, hey, you can rent it, and it's $350 a Sunday morning, but it's between 9 o'clock and 11 o'clock. It's going to kind of constrain us to what we can do and how we can do things. Whereas if we have our own space, so those are just some of those things. I wish I could answer in more detail because I'm a detail guy. I love to be able to say, this is what youth group's going to look like, or this is what the kids ministry is going to look like. I just can't tell you at that point. But that's a good question, and feel free to email me those too, because I want to come back when I do know the answer and share them with you. So good question.
So on that too, something with the other church plant, their big thing was, we're going to see where the grass wears. So this is like I don't know, you probably heard of that before, but a lot of times you can't
No, it's
That's
just
what I'm
like totally
saying.
like weird environment for a church.
You're going to might have to step out of
Yeah.
some comfort.
Yeah.
You have to look at things, you might have to look at things differently.
No, it's good. What is what's the you wear where the grass what's?
Well,
For the grass is growing out.
I like that.
So they did this mod anyway at like the college.
graze when the grass
Well, the college is they didn't want to build the college and then make the path, because they said college kids anyway. They
Make
just
their own
walk
path.
Where the path makes no sense, so they didn't put sidewalks in. They for X amount of time waited
okay.
to see where the kids
That's
walked,
good.
and then that's where they.
Gotcha.
made
No, that's a great question. Because, like, for instance, if God brings to our church family instantaneously, like 7 or 8 families from the community that all have young kids, well, guess where me as a leader of the church is going to focus quickly some energy is, wow, we need to develop this now because this is where people are and this is what we need. So a lot of that is going to be fluid in a lot of ways. I wish it wasn't as fluid, but that'll be how it is. So, good question. Other questions? Bob, that either means everyone's ready to go or I did a good job sharing information. Yeah. Well, you have Henning's Donuts. Yes.
Can I just make a comment?
Yeah.
I was involved with starting of this church as far as being at the mother church. It's not nearly what's going to be the difference. It's going to be a huge difference of how that worked. And when they were getting families to go up here, my whole small group, except for my wife and I and another couple, stayed. Everybody else left. They're like, wow, they all going. Aren't you going? I said, no. Why not? I don't feel led to. And so we stayed there. And then as the year went by, all of a sudden we moved from Sellersville. We were there for 30 years. We lived in Sellersville. We moved to Pennsburg. Are you going to go to church now? Nope. Why not? I don't feel led to. And we were in our house about a year, and God worked with us, and we worked through it, and we said now's the time to go because now God's moved our hearts to go. So you may not get some, you may not feel led to go right away, but I've watched Brian here mature dramatically in his walk with the Lord, and I'm excited for our church to birth that church. I think it's really exciting. I think it's being done in the right way, and I think God's really going to bless it.
Praise the Lord. Yes.
I just want to add another something to share. Nikki and I originally met in First Baptist in Boyertown. That's where we began our journey together. And First Baptist has planted 2 churches. Each time within a few years of each other, like late 90s. Yeah. Both churches, I mean, probably at least 50 to 100 converts within the first few years.
Awesome. Yeah.
You're talking about the numbers at First Baptist were replaced, the needs financially, people-wise,
Yeah.
within like a year.
Yep.
I would say the one church plant only lasted 10 years, but the other one is still going strong and impacting the community it's in. But I would say both were very successful within the greater kingdom of God,
Amen.
of like helping reach people growing, and a lot of times the people that were involved with the church plant on both sides had tremendous growth from God using that experience.
Yeah,
That was a win.
Yeah.
Any way you look at it, it was a win for the kingdom of God.
There's almost like spiritual physics that goes into planning a church because the reason is because it's designed by God to do this. But as soon as you plant a church there's often the Spirit works and there's an opening to the gospel there. But then he also, where the people left, God rewards obedience and stretching. And a lot of I have no doubt, like, it's funny, like we talk as elders, like, man, wouldn't it be nice to just shut down the simulcast? Because, and then we have, when the church plant happens, and we can have everyone upstairs. It fits into our philosophy of relational one family ministry. The funny thing is we all know, like, God's already doing this, that it's not going to be long until the replacements, like, God raises up new people here, like you're saying, and, like, this continues to go on. Like, it won't even miss a beat. And that's the beauty of God. God does that. And so that's a great example. Thank you. Any other thoughts, questions before we close? Well, thank you for being here. Bob, do you mind just closing just this time here, giving us some of these things to the Lord?
God, we just thank you for this morning. Just thank you for the opportunity, first of all, just to come and worship you. Thank you so much for what you're doing here in East Greenville. God, we are excited for what you're raising up in Boyertown area. And Lord, I just pray for the people in this room, even as we're all just thinking through and praying through what that looks like for us. Lord, some of us are going to stay, some of us are going to go, but we're all going to be impacted. And I just ask you that you make it absolutely clear in the coming months of what people you want to send. And Lord, I know we all can be a prayer partners and just raising this church. And we pray that just even now, next year we can look back and just say, wow, what you've done is amazing here in this area as well in Boyertown. We just commit this to you in your name. Amen.
Amen. Thanks, everybody. Always here for questions.